They say when humans go to war, even the stars themselves hold their breath. I thought it was just another myth spread by cowards who had never seen real combat. After all, how dangerous could these soft, pink creatures really be? They had no natural armor, no claws, no venom sacs, and their lifespans were laughably short compared to most galactic species. I was a decorated Zeltharian warrior with over 2 centuries of battlefield experience. My exoskeleton could deflect plasma bolts, my 4 arms could wield weapons with precision that made snipers weep, and my people had conquered 17 star systems before humans had even discovered fire. When the Galactic Defense Coalition announced they were forming joint task forces with human units, I volunteered immediately. Not because I respected them, because I was curious. The other species whispered warnings in the corridors of the command ship. The Aquarians spoke of human berserker rage, with the same tone they reserved for discussing black holes. The crystalline Vorthak, being so ancient they remembered the birth of civilizations, actually trembled when describing human pack hunting behavior. Even the machine-like Synthari, who processed emotions as mere data points, seemed to malfunction slightly when human tactical reports crossed their networks. But I had studied the humans' military records. Yes, they had won some impressive victories, but always against inferior opponents or through technological advantages. Their individual combat statistics were mediocre at best. Their reaction times were slower than most species, their strength was average, and they seemed to break down emotionally under stress in ways that would be considered serious mental defects in any civilized species. I was going to prove that human military prowess was nothing more than carefully crafted propaganda designed to compensate for their obvious biological inadequacies. I had no idea that in just 72 hours, I would be begging the universe for forgiveness, desperately trying to understand how I had so catastrophically underestimated the most terrifying species the galaxy had ever known. The war was about to teach me why, when humans decide to fight, even death itself steps aside to watch. My name is Kethvar Zolthan, 3rd Claw of the Zeltharian Dominion's 47th Assault Legion. For the past 2 centuries, I have served with distinction across 12 different war zones, from the crystal caverns of Zirian Prime to the methane storms of the Outer Reach colonies. My combat record speaks for itself. 437 confirmed kills, 6 battlefield promotions, and the personal commendation of High Commander Yixtel herself. I am telling you this not to boast, but to establish credibility for what I am about to describe. Because what I witnessed during the Battle of Kepler 442b has changed everything I thought I knew about warfare, about fear, and about the species that call themselves human. The Joint Task Force assignment came through standard military channels 3 weeks ago. The hegemony had established a forward operating base on Kepler 442b, a strategically vital world that controlled the hyperspace lanes to 7 different systems. Intelligence reports indicated heavy fortification, automated defense systems, and a garrison force of approximately 50,000 enemy combatants from various hegemony species. The Galactic Defense Coalition's response was to assemble a multi-species assault force of 30,000 troops, including elements from 8 different member worlds. I was assigned to Tactical Group 7, which consisted of 200 Zeltharian shock troopers, 300 Aquarian siege specialists, 100 Vorthak heavy weapons teams, and 150 humans from something called the Terra Marine Expeditionary Force. My first meeting with the humans took place in the transport ship's briefing room. I arrived early, as is proper for a professional soldier, and took my position at the tactical display. The Aquarians filtered in next, their gill slits fluttering nervously as they always did before combat. The Vorthak crystalline forms chimed softly as they communicated in their harmonic language. Finally, the humans entered. They were smaller than I had expected. The tallest barely reached my chest, and their pink skin looked impossibly fragile compared to my chitinous exoskeleton. They moved with a casual confidence that bordered on arrogance, talking and laughing among themselves with what I could only interpret as a shocking lack of proper military bearing. Their leader, A female with the rank insignia of colonel introduced herself as Sarah Chun. "Pleasure to work with you all," she said, her translator rendering her words in Standard Galactic. "I've heard good things about Zeltharian shock tactics. Looking forward to seeing you in action." The casual familiarity of her tone irritated me. In Zeltharian military culture, respect is earned through demonstrated competence and proper protocol. These humans seem to assume camaraderie based on nothing more than shared species membership in the coalition. Colonel Chun activated the holographic display, showing detailed scans of our target. "The hegemony has dug in deep," she explained, highlighting various defensive positions. 3 tiers of automated plasma cannons, energy shields around the primary structures, and sensor networks that'll detect anything larger than a grain of sand from 50 kilometers out. The Aquarian commander, Depth Singer Morloth, gestured with his tentacles toward the display. The approach vectors are heavily fortified. Standard assault doctrine suggests orbital bombardment, followed by a landing in force at the designated weak points. "That's what they'll be expecting," Colonel Chin replied, "which is exactly why we're not going to do it." She manipulated the display, zooming in on a section of mountainous terrain 60 kilometers from the primary target. "We're going to land here, in the middle of a storm system that will mask our heat signatures. Then we're going to walk." The silence in the room was profound. Even the Vorthack stopped their harmonic chiming. "Walk?" I finally asked, my translator crackling with disbelief. 60 kilometers through hostile terrain, carrying full combat loads, while maintaining operational security? "Actually," Colonel Chun said with what I would later learn was a human expression called a grin, "it's closer to 75 kilometers once you account for the terrain features we'll need to navigate around." The Aquarian commander's gill slits were fluttering rapidly. "Colonel Chun, with respect, such an approach would exhaust most species before reaching the combat zone. The physical demands alone?" "Leave the physical demands to us," she interrupted. "Your people handle the technical infiltration. The Vorthack provide heavy fire support once we reach the target. The Zeltharians spearhead the final assault, and we'll get everyone to the party." I studied the topographical data more carefully. The route she was proposing would take us through 3 mountain passes, across 2 river systems, and over terrain that ranged from temperate forest to near Arctic conditions. The elevation changes alone would challenge even Zeltharian endurance, and we were considered among the most physically resilient species in the galaxy. "Your equipment loadouts must be significantly different from standard coalition forces," I observed. "Perhaps powered exoskeletons or gravitational assistance devices." Colonel Chenis Grandwidend. Just good old-fashioned human stubbornness. The mission briefing continued for another hour, during which the humans outlined an infiltration plan that was simultaneously brilliant and insane. They proposed moving the entire force of 800 troops across 75 kilometers of difficult terrain, maintaining complete communication silence, and arriving at the target zone in fighting condition. As we prepared to depart the briefing room, I approached Colonel Chun directly. "I have studied human military history," I told her. "Your species has achieved some notable victories, but they have typically relied on technological advantages or favorable circumstances. This mission will require pure physical endurance and tactical discipline. Are you certain your people are prepared for such demands?" She looked up at me, and I do mean up, as she was barely 2/3 my height, and her expression became serious. "Kethvar, right? Let me tell you something about humans. We evolved as persistence hunters on a world that tried to kill us every single day. We ran down animals 10 times our size by simply refusing to quit. We survived ice ages, plagues, and predators by being too stubborn to die. So when I say we're going to walk 75 kilometers through hell and deliver you to that target, I want you to understand something very clearly." She paused, and for just a moment, I saw something in her eyes that made my exoskeleton crawl. "This isn't even going to be particularly difficult." 6 hours later, we were aboard dropships, descending through the atmosphere of Kepler, 442b. The storm system was every bit as violent as the meteorological reports had indicated, with winds exceeding 200 kilometers per hour and electrical activity that made instrument readings nearly impossible. Our dropship bucked and rolled as the pilot fought to maintain control. Through the viewports, I could see lightning illuminating massive cloud formations that towered into the stratosphere. The Aquarians had gone pale green with motion sickness, and even some of the Vorthack were showing signs of distress as the crystalline resonance in their bodies was disrupted by the atmospheric turbulence. The humans, by contrast, appear to be enjoying themselves. "Bit of chop today," one of them commented casually. "Reminds me of that insertion over Titan," another replied. "Remember how Rodriguez lost his lunch all over the lieutenant's boots?" They were laughing. In the middle of a combat insertion, through conditions that had half the other species in the dropship on the verge of panic, these humans were sharing amusing anecdotes and laughing. The landing was rough enough to crack 2 of my exoskeleton plates, and I had to help several of the Aquarians who had been thrown clear of their restraints. When the cargo doors opened, we were immediately hit by wind-driven rain that felt like frozen needles and a cold that penetrated even my natural armor. I had experienced hostile environments before, but this was genuinely unpleasant. The temperature was just above freezing, the humidity was crushing, and the wind made communication difficult even with electronic amplification. The humans began unpacking their equipment with methodical efficiency. No complaints, no hesitation, no apparent discomfort despite the fact that their soft skin was completely exposed to elements that were making the rest of us miserable. "Movement in 5 minutes," Colonel Chun announced. "Standard marching order. Humans take point and rear guard. Everyone else stays in the middle where it's safe." "Safe?" asked Depth Singer Morloth, his translator struggling with the wind noise. "Ça fait, Colonel Shen corrected. Nothing about the next 3 days is going to be actually safe." As we began moving through the forest, I quickly realized that my understanding of human capabilities had been fundamentally flawed. They moved through the terrain with a fluid grace that seemed impossible for bipedal creatures. Their feet found purchase on surfaces where my 4 legs struggled for traction. They navigated around obstacles and through underbrush as if they had been born in these mountains. But it was their endurance that truly began to concern me. After the first hour of movement, I was breathing heavily and my exoskeleton was clicking with the strain of maintaining pace. The Aquarians were already showing signs of fatigue, and the Vorthack were consuming emergency energy cells to maintain their crystalline matrix cohesion. The humans hadn't even begun to sweat. By the 3rd hour, I was forced to admit that something was seriously wrong with my assumptions. These creatures were maintaining a pace that was challenging me, a Zeltharian warrior in peak physical condition, without apparent effort. When I finally asked for a brief rest stop, Colonel Chun called for a 5-minute break without any indication that her people needed it. "Ow!" I asked her directly. "Your species has inferior muscle density, shorter limbs for leverage, and less efficient respiratory systems. By every biological metric, you should be the ones struggling to maintain this pace." She took a long drink from her water supply and considered her answer. "Kethvar, what do you know about Earth? Your homeworld? Standard Class M planet. Gravity slightly higher than galactic average, but not significantly so. Single large moon, stable orbit, unremarkable in most respects." "Right," she said. "Unremarkable. Except for one thing. Earth tried to kill us for 3 million years, and we're still here. Do you know what the average lifespan of a human was just a few hundred years ago?" I accessed my cultural database. Approximately 30 to 40 standard years, depending on technological development. 35 years, she confirmed. "Do you know how long the average Zeltharian lives?" 400 to 500 years, depending on environmental factors and genetic predisposition. "Right. So tell me, Kethvar, what kind of species develops the ability to reproduce, raise offspring, and pass on genetic advantages in just 35 years? The question caught me off guard. I had never considered the evolutionary implications of such a short lifespan. A species under enormous selective pressure, Colonel Chun continued. For millions of years, Earth kept trying to kill us. Ice ages, volcanic eruptions, predators, diseases, climate changes that happened faster than most species could adapt. The only humans who survived were the ones who could run farther, fight harder, think faster, and adapt quicker than everything that wanted them dead. She stood up and shouldered her equipment pack, which I now realized was significantly heavier than what the other species were carrying. We didn't evolve to be the strongest or the fastest or the toughest, HFY. We evolved to be the most stubborn. When everything else gives up, we keep going. When the smart move is to quit, we double down. When the odds are impossible, we figure out how to cheat. She started walking again, and the rest of us followed. So when you ask how we can maintain this pace, you're asking the wrong question. The right question is, what could possibly make us stop? Over the next 8 hours, I began to understand what she meant. The terrain became progressively worse as we climbed into the mountains. The temperature dropped below freezing, the wind increased, and we were forced to navigate through sections of loose rock that threatened to give way with every step. The Aquarians began to suffer from hypothermia despite their thermal suits. 2 of the Vorthack experienced matrix fractures from the cold and had to be assisted by their companions. Even I was feeling the effects of the altitude and the constant physical demands. The humans never slowed down. When Singer Morloth collapsed from exhaustion, 2 humans immediately moved to support him without breaking stride. When one of the Vorthack units began to shut down from energy depletion, a human soldier produced a portable power cell from somewhere in his equipment and performed field repairs while continuing to march. Where did that come from? I asked Colonel Chun. Standard load, she replied. We carry backup equipment for everyone else. That must add considerable weight to your individual loads. About 15 kilos per person. I did the mathematics in my head. These humans were already carrying equipment loads that would challenge most species, and they had been carrying additional gear for the rest of us the entire time. Why didn't you mention this during the briefing? She gave me that expression again, the one that made my exoskeleton crawl. Because it's not worth mentioning. This is just what we do. As we made camp for the night in a sheltered valley, I found myself reassessing everything I thought I knew about human capabilities. They had not only maintained the punishing pace they had set, but had done so while supporting the other species and carrying extra equipment. And, according to Colonel Chun, this was just the beginning. Tomorrow gets interesting, she told me as her soldiers established a perimeter with methodical precision. We start the technical climbing sections. Technical climbing, the term wasn't translating properly. Rope work, vertical ascents. Some of the cliff faces we need to traverse tomorrow are nearly 90 degrees. I stared at the topographical display she was showing me. These formations are impassable for most species without specialized equipment. Good thing we brought rope. Just rope. And pitons. Maybe some carabiners if we're feeling fancy. She was describing an ascent that would challenge professional mountaineering teams with full technical support, and she was talking about it as if it were a minor inconvenience. Colonel Chun, I said carefully, are you certain this is within normal human capabilities? She looked at me for a long moment, and I realized that what I had interpreted as casual confidence was actually something much more profound. HFY, she said quietly, you still don't understand what you're dealing with, do you? Around us, her soldiers were setting up camp with movements that were economical, efficient, and completely silent. They worked in pairs, communicating through hand signals that were too complex for my translator to interpret. Within minutes, they had established defensive positions, concealed shelters, and a command post that was invisible from more than 10 meters away. We haven't even started fighting yet, Colonel Chun continued. Everything you've seen so far, this is just us walking from point A to point B. Wait until you see what happens when someone actually threatens us. That night, as I tried to sleep in temperatures that would have killed most unprotected species, I listened to the humans maintaining their watch rotation. They moved through the darkness like ghosts, invisible and silent, checking on the other species and adjusting equipment as needed. I began to suspect that the warnings I had dismissed as cowardice might have been something else entirely. The next morning brought new challenges and new revelations about human capabilities. The cliff faces Colonel Chun had mentioned were even more daunting in daylight. Vertical walls of rock that stretched up into the clouds, with handholds that looked insufficient for creatures with 4 arms, let alone 2. The humans began their ascent as if they were going for a casual walk. I watched in growing amazement as they moved up surfaces that should have been impossible to climb. Their technique was flawless, their movements efficient, and their confidence absolute. When they reached anchor points, they secured lines for the rest of us with knots that were small works of art in their complexity and reliability. How many hours of training does it take to develop such climbing skills? I asked Colonel Chun during one of our brief rest stops. Most of us learned as children, she replied. Standard physical education curriculum. Your children learn technical mountaineering as part of basic education. Among other things, swimming, running, basic martial arts, survival skills. Nothing too advanced. I was beginning to realize that human definitions of basic and advanced were fundamentally different from those used by other species. By the time we reached the summit of the first major peak, I had witnessed displays of physical capability that challenged everything I understood about biological limitations. The humans had not only completed an ascent that would have been considered expert-level mountaineering by galactic standards, but they had done so while assisting the other species and maintaining full combat readiness. And we were still 24 hours away from the actual fighting. As we began our descent into the valley where our target was located, Colonel Chun gathered the leadership team for final mission planning. The hegemony base was visible in the distance, a complex of hardened structures surrounded by defensive systems that looked formidable even from our elevated position. Phase 1 begins at 0400, she announced. We approach to within 2 kilometers using natural concealment. Phase 2, the technical teams disable the sensor network while maintaining communication blackout. Phase 3, we assault the primary defensive positions simultaneously from 4 directions. Depth-Singer Morluth studied the tactical display with obvious concern. The defensive positions are heavily fortified. Energy shields, automated weapons systems, overlapping fields of fire. A frontal assault against such positions would normally require at least a 3-to-1 numerical advantage. Good thing we're not normal, Colonel Chun replied. The Vorthak commander, whose harmonic name was unpronounceable but translated roughly as resonance of certain victory, chimed a question. What specialized equipment will be required for the assault phase? Colonel Chin's smile was beginning to make me nervous. Same thing we've been using all along. Standard human infantry loadout. That's impossible, I said. No infantry unit, regardless of species, can assault prepared positions without heavy weapon support, air cover, or technological advantages. You're thinking like a civilized species, Colonel Chun replied. That's your first mistake. She manipulated the display to show detailed schematics of the enemy fortifications. The hegemony builds their defenses according to galactic standard military doctrine. Overlapping fields of fire, redundant systems, logical approach routes covered by automated systems. They're expecting an attack by rational opponents using conventional tactics. And instead, they're getting humans, I said, beginning to understand. Exactly. They prepared for civilized warfare. But humans aren't civilized, Kethvar. We're barely controlled predators who learned how to use tools. And when we decide to kill something, we become very creative about how to do it. As she spoke, I noticed that the other human soldiers were preparing their equipment with movements that were becoming increasingly focused and deliberate. There was a change in their demeanor that was subtle but unmistakable, a sharpening of attention, a heightening of awareness that spoke to instincts I recognized from my own species' hunting behaviors. Colonel, I said carefully, exactly what are you planning? For the first time since we had met, her smile disappeared entirely. We're going to show the galaxy why humans don't need to be the strongest or the fastest or the toughest, she said. We just need to be the most frightening. As darkness fell, and we moved into our final approach positions, I realized that everything I had witnessed over the past 2 days, the impossible endurance, the casual competence, the absolute confidence, had been nothing more than humans in their normal state. I was about to discover what they were like when they decided to go to war. The transformation began at 0200 hours, 2 hours before the planned assault. I had been watching the human soldiers during our approach to the target zone, noting their methodical preparation and apparent calm. But as 0 hour approached, something fundamental changed in their behavior. It was subtle at first, a sharpening of focus, an economy of movement that spoke to predatory instincts I recognized, but had never seen expressed with such controlled intensity. Colonel Chun gathered her unit leaders for the final briefing in a depression between 2 rocky outcroppings, using hand signals to maintain communication security. The other species representatives watched as she outlined the assault plan, using nothing more than scratches in the dirt and finger movements that were too rapid for my translator to interpret. "Questions?" she whispered when the briefing was complete. There were no questions. The humans simply nodded and began to disperse back to their units with movements that were becoming increasingly fluid and predatory. I realized I was watching a pack preparing for a hunt, and the recognition sent involuntary defensive spikes extending from my exoskeleton. "Something wrong, Kethvar?" Colonel Chen asked, noticing my defensive posture. "Your people are changing," I said carefully. "Their behavior patterns are shifting toward what my species would recognize as pre-combat hunting mode." Her expression in the darkness was unreadable. "We're getting ready to work. This is how humans prepare for battle. This is how humans prepare to kill things that need killing." The distinction was important and terrifying. At 0330, the first phase of the operation began with an infiltration that redefined my understanding of stealth capabilities. I had witnessed Zeltharian shadow troops at work, and I considered our infiltration techniques among the most sophisticated in the galaxy. What I observed from the humans made our best stealth operatives look like charging battle beasts. They didn't just move quietly. They seemed to become part of the environment itself. Their footsteps made no sound on surfaces that clicked and clattered when my own feet touched them. They navigated through sensor fields with an intuitive understanding of detection patterns that should have required advanced technical training. When they needed to disable security systems, they did so with tools that appeared to be little more than modified personal equipment. "Ow!" I whispered to Colonel Chun as we watched her soldiers systematically dismantling the hegemony's outer sensor network. "Practice," she replied. "And evolution. Evolution. 3 million years of being hunted by things with better senses than us. We learned to be very, very quiet. As the outer perimeter was secured, I began to understand that human military capabilities weren't based on superior technology or overwhelming force. They were based on an intuitive understanding of violence that had been refined across millennia of predatory evolution. The hegemony had constructed their defenses according to galactic standard military doctrine, which assumed rational opponents who would approach from logical directions using conventional tactics. The humans were approaching from directions that no sane military planner would consider, using methods that violated every principle of accepted assault doctrine. Instead of attacking the strongest points first to establish fire superiority, they were infiltrating through areas that the enemy had left lightly defended because they were considered impassable. Instead of concentrating their forces for maximum impact, they were spreading out in a pattern that would have been suicide for any other species, but allowed them to attack from everywhere simultaneously. This violates basic tactical principles. I observed as I watched human teams taking positions that should have left them isolated and vulnerable. Galactique tactical principle, Colonel Shen corrected. Human tactical principles are different. How so? Galactic warfare assumes civilized opponents who will behave rationally and predictably. Human warfare assumes that the enemy is just another type of prey animal, and prey animals are stupid when they're scared. At 0400 exactly, the assault began. The first indication that something was happening came from the hegemony's automated defense systems, which began firing at targets that shouldn't have existed. The energy weapons were tracking movement patterns that registered on their sensors, but made no tactical sense. Rapid advances followed by impossible disappearances, approach vectors that defied the geometric limitations of the terrain, and coordination between units that should have been unable to communicate. Then, the real horror began. I had studied human military history extensively, and I thought I understood their approach to warfare. They used superior logistics to overwhelm enemies, employed technological advantages to offset their biological limitations, and relied on numerical superiority to compensate for individual weaknesses. I was wrong about everything. The humans who emerged from the darkness around the hegemony base were not the same creatures who had spent 3 days marching through difficult terrain with casual competence. These were predators in their natural element, and they had come to hunt. They moved with a fluid coordination that spoke to instincts developed over millions of years of pack hunting. When one team engaged an enemy position, 2 others would simultaneously attack from angles that created overlapping fields of fire. When defenders moved to respond to one threat, they found themselves exposed to attackers who had somehow anticipated their movement and positioned themselves accordingly. But it was the sounds they made that truly terrified me. Humans in combat didn't just fight, they communicated through a complex system of vocalizations that my translator couldn't interpret. Shouts, calls, and battle cries that seemed designed not just to coordinate their own forces, but to psychologically destabilize their opponents. What are they saying? I asked Colonel Chun as we listened to her soldiers advancing through the enemy positions. Nothing your translator would understand, she replied. It's not really language. Then what is it? Hunting calls, pack coordination signals, threat displays. The same things our ancestors used when they were running down mastodons. The effect on the enemy was immediate and devastating. The hegemony forces had been prepared to fight a conventional engagement against rational opponents using standard tactics. Instead, they found themselves facing something that their evolutionary instincts recognized as an apex predator. Through my optical enhancements, I could see enemy soldiers abandoning defensive positions that should have been impregnable, not because they were being overwhelmed by superior firepower, but because their own survival instincts were telling them to run from something that registered as fundamentally dangerous. They're fleeing, I observed with amazement. The hegemony forces are abandoning prepared positions. Terror is a force multiplier, Colonel Chin replied. Fear makes intelligent opponents stupid, and stupid enemies make mistakes. As the assault continued, I witnessed displays of human combat capability that challenged my understanding of biological possibilities. Individual soldiers were engaging multiple opponents simultaneously, using tactics that seemed to rely more on aggression and unpredictability than on superior equipment or training. One human, isolated from his unit and surrounded by 6 hegemony troops, didn't attempt to withdraw or call for support. Instead, he attacked all 6 at once, using a combination of ranged and close-quarters combat techniques that turn a hopeless situation into a massacre. When it was over, he simply continued his advance as if nothing significant had happened. How is that possible? I demanded. 1 soldier against 6 trained opponents should be a losing proposition regardless of species capabilities. Colonel Chun was monitoring her unit's progress through a tactical display that showed friendly positions as blue dots moving through the enemy complex. You're still thinking like a civilized species, Kethvar. You see 1 human against 6 enemies. But that human sees 6 prey animals that have separated themselves from the herd. Prey animals? Everything is prey to a persistence hunter. Size doesn't matter. Numbers don't matter. Equipment advantages don't matter. The only thing that matters is which side is more determined to keep fighting. As I watched the tactical display, I began to understand what she meant. The human forces were advancing through the enemy complex in a pattern that looked chaotic, but was actually creating a psychological effect that was more devastating than any conventional assault. The hegemony defenders couldn't predict where the next attack would come from because the humans weren't following logical tactical patterns. They were following hunting instincts that had been refined across millions of years of predatory evolution. They attacked when attacking made no sense, withdrew when withdrawal appeared to be weakness, and coordinated their movements in ways that created confusion and terror among opponents who had been trained to fight rational enemies. This isn't warfare, I realized. This is a hunt. Now you're getting it, Colonel Chun replied. The breakthrough came when the human forces reached the Central Command Complex. According to the intelligence reports, this was the most heavily fortified section of the base, protected by energy shields, automated defense systems, and a garrison force of elite hegemony troops. The humans attacked it from below. While conventional military doctrine would have focused on the obvious approach routes, the humans had spent the previous hour tunneling through the foundation systems using improvised explosive charges and cutting tools that they had somehow fabricated from standard equipment components. When they emerged inside the command center, they did so simultaneously from 12 different access points that the defenders had never considered vulnerable. The result was not a battle. It was a slaughter. The hegemony troops, caught completely off guard by an assault that had come from an impossible direction, never had a chance to establish effective resistance. The humans moved through the command complex with the coordinated efficiency of a pack bringing down large prey, eliminating opposition with a combination of overwhelming aggression and tactical precision that left no room for organized defense. Targets neutralized, came the report over the communication system. Command complex secured, beginning intelligence gathering operations. The entire assault had lasted 17 minutes. As we moved forward to join the human forces in the capture facility, I found myself reassessing everything I thought I understood about military capabilities. The hegemony base had been designed to withstand assault by conventional military forces using standard galactic tactical doctrine. It had been overwhelmed by creatures who fought like evolved predators using instincts that had been refined across geological timescales. How many casualties? I asked Colonel Chun as we entered the command complex. 2 minor injuries. Rodriguez sprained his ankle during the tunnel approach, and Martinez got a plasma burn on his arm from a near miss. 2 injuries? In an assault against a heavily fortified position with 50,000 defenders. Most of them ran, she explained. Once the outer perimeter was breached, their morale collapsed. Fear is contagious, especially when it's justified. As we moved through the capture facility, I could see evidence of the hegemony's panicked retreat everywhere. Equipment had been abandoned, defensive positions left unmanned, and communication systems shut down so hastily that critical intelligence data had been left unsecured. They didn't even attempt to destroy their intelligence files, observed Depth Singer Morluth, whose normally calm demeanor had been replaced by obvious bewilderment. No time, Colonel Chin replied. When humans are hunting you, there's no time to think about anything except running. The intelligence windfall was extraordinary. The hegemony command staff had abandoned detailed tactical plans, strategic assessments, and communication protocols that would compromise their operations across 7-star systems. What should have been a difficult assault to capture a single forward base had become an intelligence coup that would affect the entire war effort. This is unprecedented, announced the Vorthack commander, whose harmonic patterns were fluctuating with excitement. The strategic implications of this intelligence data will reshape our understanding of hegemony capabilities and intentions. But I was more interested in understanding what I had just witnessed. Colonel Chun, I said as we established temporary command facilities in the capture complex, your forces just achieved something that conventional military analysis would have considered impossible. How do I explain this to my superiors? She considered the question carefully. What do you know about Earth's natural history? Very little beyond basic planetary data. Earth has experienced 5 major extinction events over the past 500 million years. Asteroid impacts, volcanic eruptions, climate shifts that wiped out 90% of all living species. But do you know what survived every single extinction event? I accessed my biological databases. Small, adaptable species with high reproductive rates and efficient resource utilization. Exactly. And do you know what that kind of evolutionary pressure produces? Opportunistic species with enhanced survival capabilities. It produces killers, HFY. Everything that survived on Earth survived because it was better at killing things than the things that wanted to kill it. And humans? Humans are what you get when you take a moderately intelligent persistence hunter and subject it to 3 million years of evolutionary pressure that favored intelligence, cooperation, and creative problem solving. As she spoke, I watched her soldiers establishing defensive positions and organizing the captured intelligence data with movements that were economical, efficient, and utterly professional. But now I could see the predatory awareness that underlay their apparent calm, the constant scanning for threats, the automatic positioning that maintained optimal fields of fire, the pack coordination that required no verbal communication. We didn't evolve to be civilized, HFY. We evolved to hunt things that were bigger, stronger, and more dangerous than we were. We learned to cooperate because cooperation made us more effective killers. We developed intelligence because intelligence helped us find new ways to kill things that were too dangerous to fight directly. And civilization? Civilization is what happens when you take a species of persistence hunters and give them agriculture, technology, and enough food that they don't have to kill things every day to survive. But the hunting instincts don't go away. They just wait. As if to illustrate her point, one of her soldiers approached with a situation report. Colonel, we've secured the primary data cores and established perimeter defenses. No sign of enemy reinforcement activity, but we've detected several escape pods launching from the far side of the complex. Let them go, Colonel Chen replied. Word of what happened here will spread faster than any intelligence report we could file. That's deliberate? I asked. Terror is a force multiplier, she repeated. Every hegemony soldier who hears about this engagement will know that humans don't fight like civilized species. They'll know that surrender might not be an option, that retreat might not be possible, and that facing humans in combat means facing something that their own instincts recognize as a natural predator. Psychological warfare. Evolution, she corrected. We're just using the tools that 3 million years of natural selection gave us. As I compiled my after-action report, I struggled to find terms that would adequately describe what I had witnessed. The humans had achieved a tactical victory that defied conventional analysis using capabilities that hadn't appeared in any of their official military specifications. But more disturbing than their combat effectiveness was the realization that they hadn't used any special weapons, advanced technology, or superior numbers. They had simply applied predatory instincts that had been refined across geological timescales to a military situation that their opponents had never encountered. Colonel Chun, I asked as we prepared for extraction, why don't other species know about this? Human military capabilities, I mean. Why isn't this information more widely available? Her expression became thoughtful. Because we don't like to advertise it. Most species in the galaxy have evolved past their predatory phases. They become civilized, rational, cooperative. When they encounter humans, they see a species that's also civilized, rational, and cooperative. But that's not the complete picture. No, she said quietly. The complete picture is that humans are barely domesticated predators who learn to use tools and control fire. We're civilized when it's convenient and advantageous to be civilized. But when civilization fails, we revert to what we've always been. And what is that? The most successful persistence hunters in the galaxy's evolutionary history. As our extraction ships arrived and we prepared to depart the captured facility, I found myself looking at the human soldiers with a fundamentally different understanding. They were loading equipment and securing prisoners with the same professional competence they had demonstrated throughout the mission, but now I could see the predatory awareness that never entirely disappeared. HFY, Colonel Chin said as we boarded the transport. You asked me earlier why the galaxy fears humans. I think you have your answer now. I did have my answer, but it raised questions that I wasn't sure I was prepared to consider. If humans could achieve this level of military effectiveness using nothing more than their natural evolutionary heritage, what would they be capable of if they ever decided to abandon civilization entirely? What would happen if they stopped pretending to be just another member species of the galactic community and revealed themselves as what they actually were? What would happen if humans ever decided to stop being civilized? As our transport climbed away from Kepler 442b toward the waiting fleet, I realized that I had witnessed something that would reshape my understanding not just of human capabilities, but of the fundamental nature of the galaxy's most successful species. And I was beginning to suspect that what I had seen was only the beginning. The journey back to Coalition Command gave me time to process what I had witnessed, but also to observe human behavior during what should have been a routine transport operation. What I discovered during those 3 days fundamentally changed my understanding of not just human military capabilities, but of the species itself. The other coalition forces treated the return trip as an opportunity to rest and recover from the mission's demands. The Aquarians spent most of their time in meditation tanks, restoring their electrolyte balance after the stress of terrestrial operations. The Vorthack entered dormant states to allow their crystalline matrices to realign after the disruption of combat. Even my own people settled into the reduced activity patterns appropriate for post-mission recovery. The humans never stopped working. While the rest of us decompressed, they were analyzing captured intelligence data, reviewing tactical footage of the assault, and conducting detailed debriefings that examined every aspect of the operation. But it wasn't the intensity of their analysis that disturbed me. It was the systematic nature of their approach to understanding violence. Learning from experience, Colonel Chun explained when I asked about their post-mission activities. Every engagement teaches us something new about how to kill things more effectively. They weren't just reviewing what had happened. They were studying it. They analyzed the psychological effects of their hunting calls on different species, cataloged the most effective approach routes for similar facilities, and developed tactical modifications based on how various enemy types had responded to their assault techniques. This level of analysis, I observed, suggests that warfare is central to human cognitive development. Not warfare, Colonel Chin corrected. Problem solving. Humans are very good at identifying problems and developing creative solutions. And the problems you solve most frequently involve killing things. Her expression became thoughtful. Kethvar, what do you think human civilization actually is? The question caught me off guard. A cooperative social structure that allows for technological development, cultural advancement, and peaceful coexistence between individuals. Close, she said, but not quite accurate. Human civilization is what happens when you give a species of persistence hunters enough resources that they don't have to kill things constantly to survive. It's a way of channeling predatory instincts into constructive activities. Constructive activities? Art, science, exploration, trade, diplomacy. All the things that make us useful members of the galactic community. But those are learned behaviors, Kethvar. The hunting instincts are hardwired. As if to demonstrate her point, she activated a personal display device and showed me historical footage from human military conflicts throughout their development. Pre-contact warfare, she explained as images of primitive human conflicts played across the screen. What I saw was deeply disturbing. Humans fighting other humans with weapons that were crude by galactic standards, but employed with a sophistication that spoke to intuitive understanding of violence. They used terrain, weather, and psychological factors in ways that suggested capabilities far beyond their technological development level. Your species was fighting wars of this sophistication before you achieved spaceflight? I asked, studying tactical movements that would have impressed Zeltharian military academies. We were fighting wars of this sophistication before we invented agriculture, she replied. What you're seeing is just the most recent few thousand years. Human warfare goes back hundreds of thousands of years, evolving alongside our cognitive development. The implications were staggering. Most species developed advanced warfare only after achieving sophisticated technology and encountering other civilizations. Humans have been refining combat techniques since before they had developed written language. This explains the tactical innovations you employed during the assault. I realized you weren't adapting standard military doctrine. You were applying techniques that predate galactic civilization. Exactly. While other species were learning to use tools and develop agriculture, humans were learning to kill things in increasingly efficient ways. By the time we achieved spaceflight, we had already spent tens of thousands of years perfecting techniques that other species have never needed to develop. Over the following days, I observed human behavior with new understanding. Their casual conversations were filled with references to historical conflicts, tactical analyses of hypothetical scenarios, and discussions of weapons and combat techniques that they pursued as intellectual interests rather than professional necessities. Do all humans receive military training? I asked after listening to a group of junior soldiers conduct a detailed analysis of ancient Earth siege techniques. Basic training, yes, Colonel Chen replied. Physical conditioning, weapons familiarity, tactical awareness, survival skills. Nothing too advanced. By now, I understood that human definitions of basic and advanced were fundamentally different from those used by other species. What they considered elementary military preparation would qualify as advanced special operations training for most galactic militaries. What about civilians? Non-military population? They get the same basic education. Physical training, survival skills, tactical awareness. We don't really distinguish between military and civilian training until specialized professional development. Your entire population receives combat training. Our entire population receives survival training, she corrected. Combat training is just part of that curriculum. As we approached Coalition Command, I was granted access to human historical databases for research purposes. What I discovered there forced me to confront the reality of what I had encountered during our mission. Human civilization was indeed advanced, sophisticated, and generally peaceful. But it was built on a foundation of military capability that was unmatched by any species in galactic history. They had fought wars of staggering complexity and brutality for tens of thousands of years before making contact with other civilizations. The records included detailed accounts of conflicts involving millions of combatants, siege techniques that lasted for years, and strategic campaigns that spanned entire continents. But what was most disturbing was the creativity with which they approached the problem of killing other humans. Chemical weapons, biological warfare, psychological operations, strategic bombing of civilian populations. I read from one historical summary. Your species developed these techniques for use against other humans? Regrettably, yes, Colonel Chen replied. We had to learn to be very good at killing things because we spent so much time trying to kill each other. But you've moved beyond that now. Internal warfare is no longer a concern. Her expression became complex. We've learned to channel those instincts more constructively, but the capabilities remain. Every human child learns the same basic skills that our ancestors used to hunt megafauna and fight tribal wars. Physical conditioning, tactical awareness, problem-solving under stress, cooperation under pressure. Why? Because civilization is fragile. Kethvar. Technology can fail, governments can collapse, and resources can become scarce. When that happens, the species that survive are the ones that remember how to be predators. As we docked with the command station, I found myself facing a profound realization about the nature of galactic civilization. Most species had evolved beyond their predatory phases before achieving spaceflight. They had developed cooperation, rationality, and peaceful coexistence as survival strategies that served them well in the galactic community. Humans were different. They had achieved civilization while retaining their predatory capabilities, and they maintained those capabilities as a deliberate cultural choice rather than an evolutionary accident. Colonel Chun, I said as we prepared to disembark, what would happen if human civilization failed? If your species reverted to its pre-civilized state? Her answer was immediate and chilling. The galaxy would become a much more dangerous place. for humans, for everyone else. The briefing at Coalition Command was unlike any military report I had ever witnessed. The human after-action analysis was so detailed and comprehensive that it fundamentally altered strategic planning for the entire war effort. They had not just captured a forward base. They had developed a complete tactical doctrine for assaulting heavily fortified positions using techniques that no other species could replicate. The psychological impact has been extraordinary, reported Admiral Tel 4 Prime, the Centauri commander responsible for intelligence analysis. Enemy communications intercepts indicate widespread panic among hegemony forces. Morale assessments suggest that fear of encountering human units is now a significant factor in their tactical planning. Terror as a force multiplier, I murmured, remembering Colonel Chen's words. Indeed, the Admiral continued. But, more significantly, the tactical innovations demonstrated during this operation have applications for other coalition forces. The humans have agreed to share their infiltration techniques, assault doctrines, and psychological warfare methods. As the briefing continued, I realized that what I had witnessed was more than just an unusually successful military operation. It was a demonstration of capabilities that would reshape the entire conflict. The hegemony had been prepared to fight a conventional war against civilized opponents using standard galactic military doctrine. They had not been prepared to face persistence hunters who approached warfare as an extension of predatory behavior that had been refined across millions of years of evolution. The implications extend beyond purely military considerations, continued Admiral Tel 4 Prime. Human combat effectiveness appears to derive from evolutionary adaptations rather than technological advantages. This suggests capabilities that are consistent and reproducible rather than dependent on specific equipment or circumstances. In other words, human military effectiveness wasn't based on superior technology that could be countered or replicated. It was based on biological and cultural factors that were integral to their species' identity. After the formal briefing, I was approached by High Commander Yixtel, my own species' senior military representative. Your report is unusual, Third Claw Zulfan. The capabilities you describe exceed our previous assessments of human military potential by several orders of magnitude. The capabilities I observed exceed our understanding of biological possibilities, I replied. But I have verified my observations through multiple sensor recordings and corroborating witness accounts. And your conclusion? That we have fundamentally misunderstood the nature of human civilization and the reasons for their military effectiveness. High Commander Yixtel's mandibles clicked in a pattern that indicated deep concern. Explain. Most species achieve civilization by evolving beyond their predatory instincts. Humans achieved civilization by learning to control and channel their predatory instincts without losing them. They remain persistence hunters who have developed advanced technology and social structures. The implications of this assessment: that human military capabilities are not dependent on technology, training, or numerical advantages. They are dependent on evolutionary adaptations that make them fundamentally different from other civilized species. As I filed my official report, I struggled to find appropriate classifications for what I had observed. Standard military analysis categories assumed that combat effectiveness was based on factors that could be measured, quantified, and compared between different forces. But human combat effectiveness appeared to be based on instinctive behaviors that had no equivalent among other species. How do you measure the tactical value of predatory instincts? I asked Colonel Chun during our final conversation before she returned to human space. You don't, she replied. You just accept that some problems require predator solutions. And if the problems become too large for predator solutions, then you get more predators. As her transport prepared to depart, I found myself contemplating the larger implications of what I had learned. The galaxy had welcomed humans as members of the civilized community, assuming that they were just another species that had evolved beyond their primitive origins to achieve technological advancement and social cooperation. But humans hadn't evolved beyond their primitive origins. They had weaponized them. Colonel Chen. I called as she boarded her transport. One final question. If humans are as dangerous as I now believe them to be, why do you continue to cooperate with other species? Why maintain civilization at all? She paused in the airlock and looked back at me. Because we like being civilized, Kethvar. We like art and music and literature. We like exploring the universe and learning new things. We like having friends among the stars. But, if someone threatens the things we like, we remember what we really are. And what is that? The most successful predators in evolutionary history. As her transport departed, I realized that my mission report would fundamentally alter the Coalition's understanding of human capabilities and intentions. But, more importantly, it would force us to confront an uncomfortable truth about the galaxy's most advanced civilization. Humans weren't just another member species that happened to be effective in combat. They were persistence hunters who had learned to use technology and social cooperation as tools for more efficient predation. They had achieved civilization not by abandoning their predatory nature, but by finding constructive applications for it. And if they ever decided that predation was more useful than cooperation, the galaxy would discover why evolution had made them so very good at hunting things that didn't want to be caught. Months later, as reports came in of hegemony forces surrendering rather than face human units, abandoning positions at the mere rumor of human presence, and requesting transfers to sectors where they wouldn't encounter coalition forces with human elements, I began to understand the true strategic significance of what I had witnessed. The humans hadn't just won a battle. They had won the war before it really began. By demonstrating that they were something other than a civilized species playing by civilized rules, they had introduced a psychological factor that the enemy couldn't overcome. Fear of humans was spreading through hegemony forces faster than any military advance could achieve. Enemy units were making tactical decisions based not on logical military considerations, but on the desperate desire to avoid encountering something that their evolutionary instincts recognized as an apex predator. Terror is a force multiplier, Colonel Chen had said, and she was right. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that terror was only the beginning. What the humans had really introduced to galactic warfare was something that no other species had ever brought to a conflict. The absolute certainty that they would keep fighting no matter what the cost, because fighting was what they had been designed by evolution to do. They weren't just soldiers following orders or civilians defending their homes. They were persistence hunters doing what persistence hunters had always done, tracking down prey and refusing to stop until the hunt was over. And, in this case, the prey was an entire interstellar empire that was beginning to understand that it had made a fundamental error in judgment. They had started a war with humans. And humans, as I'd learned to my own amazement and terror, were very, very good at finishing wars. The final reports came in 6 months later. The hegemony had requested terms for a negotiated surrender, citing irreconcilable tactical disadvantages and unsustainable operational parameters. They never mentioned humans directly in their surrender documents. They didn't need to. Everyone knew what had broken them. As I reviewed the final casualty reports and territorial adjustments that ended the conflict, I realized that I had witnessed something unprecedented in galactic history. A war won not through superior technology or overwhelming force, but through the systematic application of evolutionary advantages that predated civilization itself. The humans had saved the galaxy not by being better than everyone else, but by being fundamentally different from everyone else. And that difference, I now understood, was what made them the most terrifying species the galaxy had ever encountered. Because when humans decided to hunt something, that something was already dead. It just didn't know it yet.